Last time I shared my experience of Srila Prabhupada in Dallas, Texas, especially his installing the deities of Sri Sri Radha Kalachandji, the blackish moon-like Lord of Vrindavan. Today we'll look at lessons from the two Ratha-yatras I celebrated in Prabhupada's presence, both in major American cities, Chicago and Philadelphia. I should mention as a side note that Ratha-yatras were especially ecstatic for Prabhupada to celebrate because he was celebrating Jagannath Ratha-yatra from the age of 5, if you know his life story. Now, back in 1893, Chicago had heard the first Indian Swami to come to the West say that everyone was God, including vagrants in the street. Daridra Narayan, or, quote, poor God, who made his infamous debut at Chicago's World Parliament of Religions. That image of poor God was still roiling in the historical memory of Western clerics when Prabhupada came to town. So that was the first impression Western clerics had of Vedic religion, that everyone's God. So that was the first and the most lasting impression. It was July 1974, Ratha-yatra season. His Divine Grace arrived at the Chicago temple just in time for Guru Puja. Hundreds of local and visiting devotees packed the temple room, thrilled to worship Prabhupada in person, many seeing him for the first time. A thunderous kirtan erupted as devotees sang and danced with abandon in front of, quote, the master at whose feet all masters sit. Grave as granite, Prabhupada presided from the Vyasasana, deftly playing kartals while scanning the scene, aloof, yet all-pervading in the hearts of his followers. As the kirtan began to build, I noticed some devotees were starting to boogie. Boogie means rock and roll dancing. Boogie, a twist here. Actually, it was the African twist. A twist here, a boogaloo there. And I started boogieing too. Soon everyone was rocking with the rhythm. Monkey see, monkey do. Much like a maestro, Prabhupada raised one finger in the air and suddenly dropped it down. In an instant, the kirtan hushed. Many dancers caught in boogie tableaus. Prabhupada looked beyond the crowd to a wall painting. Gesturing to the Panchatattva, singing and dancing, His Divine Grace commanded, dance, dance like Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Yeah. He raised his finger, and again we danced, chastened by his powerful mercy. Lesson 1. Like an expert coach, Prabhupada knew when to encourage us and when to correct us. The same Prabhupada who loved to see us chant and dance, and who would often chant and dance with us, was quick to discipline us when our bhakti, our love and devotion, degraded to bhukti, sense indulgence. Prabhupada was keen to keep us dancing on the razor's edge of Krishna consciousness. Since he had come from Melbourne and was headed for Los Angeles, Melbourne being in Australia and LA in California, Prabhupada had gone far out of his way to attend Chicago's first Ratha-yatra. As we awaited his arrival by the tall carts, I was thinking I did not want to bow down in the filthy Chicago street, when suddenly Prabhupada pulled up in a yellow Volkswagen Bug, got out, saw Lord Jagannath on his cart, and spontaneously bowed down in the filthy street. Immediately, we all bowed down, again chastened by Prabhupada's absolute surrender. Lesson 2. Srila Prabhupada never asked us to do anything he was not doing himself. A true acharya, a teacher by example. Palms pressed in devoted pranams before the deities, Prabhupada was eager to ascend to Subhadra Maharani's elaborately decorated cart, where he would ride with the procession. But the cart floor was high up, and there was no stepladder. So under the fierce midday sun, Prabhupada patiently waited while devotees ran to a hardware store to get one. At last, he mounted the cart and sat on the Vyasasana. In the Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Sureshvara das Goswami describes what happened next. So this is a passage from Prabhupada's life story, Prabhupada Lilamrita. Quote, although several policemen on motorcycles led the procession, their mood was hardly that of the king of Orissa, who had traditionally led the Ratha-yatra procession in India. Each year, the king would present himself as a menial servant, leading the parade by sweeping the road before Lord Jagannath with a gold-handled broom. The Chicago police, however, seemed intent only in getting the parade over with as soon as possible. With stern anxiety, they dedicated themselves to keeping open the flow of ordinary automobile traffic. They acknowledged that the devotees had an official permit for the parade, but they continually prodded them to pull the cart faster, threatening to terminate the parade entirely. And that's the end of the passage. Lesson 3, the same thing had happened the previous year at the London Ratha-yatra, where Srila Prabhupada danced nearly the entire parade route. Actually, at that time, Prabhupada was ill, but he was so inspired that he danced practically the whole route. It was 2 miles. People couldn't believe Prabhupada's energy, just swinging, and you might have seen movies, just spinning around and jumping and clapping for miles. Normally law-abiding, Prabhupada could also confound the authorities when he could not contain his ecstasy. While the ecstasy of serving Prabhupada may sometimes make it hard for us to follow the law, we would do well to follow Prabhupada's normal example and not imitate him. I remember also at that London Ratha-yatra, Shuddhakirti would tell how, because he was next to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada's presence was so amazing to the police. They call them bobbies in London. But because Prabhupada would often, he was dancing so much that very often the parade would stop and everybody would just dance around Prabhupada. But then that was disturbing the bobbies, because then it would cause more delay, and it would create a lot of congestion. So the bobbies kept approaching Shuddhakirti to tell Prabhupada that he has to not stop. He has to keep going. So Shrudakirti would say that he told Prabhupada this 2 or 3 times, but Prabhupada just ignored him. So that same Prabhupada, who was normally very law-abiding and would be the first to obey what the authorities were saying, when the ecstasy was too great, Prabhupada just ignored. So after a while, the Babis gave up. They just let the parade go on. So as I say, the lesson was, it might be hard for us to contain our ecstasy, but for the sake of spreading the movement, it's better if we cooperate with the authorities so that they won't shut us down. Riding atop Subhadra Maharani's cart, myself and a few brahmacharis were tossing peanuts and raisins prasadam to the multitudes on both sides of State Street. State Street is the big street in Chicago that runs all the way the length of the city. It was great sport running to the cart's corners, pitching the packets and cheering the catches. Thinking of Prabhupada riding below us, I wondered if he were preparing some greater kindness for the occasion. It had been more than 80 years since that impersonalist Swami had given Westerners an erroneous and mistaken first impression of Vedic Siddhanta. Had Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu now sent his confidential servant thousands of miles out of his way to set the record straight? Still hustled by the police, the devotees at last pulled the cart off State onto Civic Center Plaza. A microphone made its way through the throng up to Prabhupada's Vyas Asan. Ladies and gentlemen, Prabhupada began with divine grace. I thank you very much for attending this, our Ratha-yatra festival. I closed my eyes and listened closer, straining to filter out the Chicago din. Quote, in the Vedanta Sutra, it is said, Janma yasya yataha, the absolute truth is that from whom everything emanates. The way Prabhupada highlighted the word whom, it was clear he had come not only to set the record straight, but to introduce everyone to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who can give everyone absolute shelter at his lotus feet. Though brief, Prabhupada's speech was historic and compassionate. Lesson 4. Like Srila Prabhupada, we can also look for opportunities to tell the truth, just appropriate to the time, place, and people. In the context of a blissful Ratha-yatra festival, it was a perfect occasion for Prabhupada to introduce everyone to Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes. Captivating as Srila Prabhupada's spoken words are, still more inspiring was the way he spontaneously applied those words in life. An endearing moment comes to mind regarding Prabhupada's visit to Philadelphia the following summer in 1975. Philadelphia, by the way, was the first capital of America. And then after some years, they built this grand planned city in what we know as Washington, D.C. But that's where the Americans plotted their leaving Britain, revolting, having their revolution. And it all happened in Philadelphia. It was Ratha-yatra season again. Srila Prabhupada had just come from Chicago, where again he had ridden Subhadra Maharani's chariot down State Street. held a press conference, granted radio, TV, and newspaper interviews, and in general caused quite a stir. Then as now, Chicago was mired in crime. And on the way there, Prabhupada had noticed a Time magazine cover story. This was in the plane on the way to Chicago. Prabhupada was looking at a Time magazine, and the cover story headline was, "Crime, Why and How to Solve It." Now, crime bled from unclean hearts, Prabhupada told a local mayor and a police lieutenant. Give us facility to cleanse the public's heart through mass chanting of God's holy names and mass distribution of sanctified food offered to the Lord. And you will see a dramatic drop in the crime rate. Exotic as Prabhupada's solution may have sounded to those officials, it was Prabhupada's remedy for another social ill, the exploitation of women that sent the media into a frenzy. The United States Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion in America was already 2 years old. This is 1975, and that Supreme Court was 1973. It was already 2 years old. So, quote, women's liberation was in full swing. Because the reporters were pursuing freedom and equality through bodily identification, Prabhupada's spiritual solutions predictably confounded them. Here are some of their exchanges. What should be the role of women in society? A reporter asked. A woman should marry and faithfully serve a qualified husband, Prabhupada replied, and share his advancement in spiritual life. In America, we say everyone is created equal. So why should a woman subordinate herself to a man? For her protection. Otherwise, she may be exploited by unscrupulous men. Then abortion, or have child without husband and go begging support from government. Is that freedom? Why do you say men and women are not equal? I do not say. Inequality, difference, is already there in nature. A woman can bear a child, a man cannot. Where is the equality? A man's duty is to protect and support the woman and help her train the children to serve God. So, if they are partners, why do you say women are less intelligent than men? As husband and wife approach the spiritual platform, Krishna gives both intelligence how to serve him. Dadami buddhi yogam. But materially, as one psychologist has shown, a man's brain is larger and heavier than a woman's. 64 ounces man, 36 ounces woman. And by the way, when Prabhupada said that, he said it with a twinkle in his eye, as if to say, as if to just try to pique their frenzy, because they were coming at him from a bodily platform, and Prabhupada was just kind of, in a sense, descending to that, but in a way that was going to make them a little even angrier. Because sometimes Prabhupada would like to have fun with the press. And now back to the story. Sometimes an exasperated reporter would leave, but most stayed to take their full measure of the Swami and get their story. The Swami was a male chauvinist. This was the press that followed Prabhupada to Philadelphia. So all that had happened in Chicago in 75. And by the time Prabhupada got to Philadelphia, everybody, all the journalists were waiting for him. just to pounce on him for being a male chauvinist, etc. So it was quite a lion's den Prabhupada was walking into. As soon as Prabhupada's plane arrived, the controversy started when a woman reporter asked, quote, "It's been reported that the Krishna consciousness movement has been what some people would consider sexist or racist by defining inferior roles for women and blacks by their natural traits. We give equal roles spiritually," Prabhupada replied. "Materially, there is distinction, just like there are so many men and women. They are differently dressed, but within the dress, the living entities, they are all the same. We make this distinction materially, not spiritually." And later, from another woman reporter, "How do you feel about women's lib?" Prabhupada, "In your country, they have given you liberty. Liberty means equal rights, is it not?" Reporter, "They're trying in this country." Prabhupada, now what Prabhupada says now, he really gives it to them. He just lets them have it. We say both barrels of the gun. Prabhupada, "All right, trying, but you women cannot see that this so-called equal right means cheating the woman. Now I say more clearly that a woman and man meet. Now they become lover. Then they have sex. And the woman becomes pregnant and the man goes away. The simple woman, she has to take charge of the child and beg from government alms. Please give me money. This is your independence. Do you think this independence, that the man makes the woman pregnant and he goes away without any responsibility, and the woman cannot give up the child? She maintains begging from the government, or she tries to kill the child. Do you think it is very good independence?" Lesson 5. The same Srila Prabhupada, who would painstakingly explain fine points of timeless Krishna culture to a respectful, inquisitive audience, could also sharply and soundly call out and criticize materialistic culture, especially to its influential agents, the members of the press. When to be soft and patient with people, and when to be sharp and swift, comes from experience. And the best experience comes from observing and hearing our founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. And now, dear translator, please remind the devotees it's time for them to start sending their questions because we're approaching the end. Prabhupada's repartee or repartee with the press often evoked cheers from the devotees. But in the clash of worldviews, he would expose not only the folly of bodily consciousness, but his own disciples' attachment to it. Did I, for example, deeply understand the material differences and spiritual equality I shared with my own god sisters? Back at the temple, I would soon find out. After Prabhupada arrived, it quickly became apparent the temple was much too small to seat all the devotees who had come to hear his arrival address. As the GBCs, sannyasis, and we brahmacharis followed Prabhupada inside, the women were left outside, running to windows to get a glimpse of his divine grace. Inside, Prabhupada sat on the Vyasasana, surveying the scene as the leaders snuggled close to his lotus feet. Prabhupada's gaze fell upon the windows where his women disciples were pressing their noses like bees desperately trying to get to the honey inside. Prabhupada looked concerned, even alarmed. Hadn't he just told the press how we give everyone, men and women, young and old, black and white, equal opportunity to pursue Krishna consciousness? With fatherly compassion, Prabhupada's voice came over the microphone. Let them inside. They want to hear. One by one, his spiritual daughters walked in, beaming with gratitude at kind Prabhupada, who kept pushing his men closer, together, to make room for these eager listeners. And later, after a sky-high kirtan, quote, you can see practically, the woman is dancing, a man is dancing. So dancing everyone, it is automatic, realizing God in relationship with God. We are all servant of Krishna. That is wanted. Lesson 6, as Srila Prabhupada would say, example is better than precept. Without Prabhupada's example, instead of attracting people to Krishna, a neophyte's thoughtless application of Krishna consciousness can easily drive people away. We owe it to ourselves, to Srila Prabhupada, and all Krishna's children to become who we are, a servant of the servant, and humbler than the grass. Okay, Prabhus, thank you so much for listening. I will be very happy now to hear your questions and comments. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for this wonderful story. We have a question. Is there any way that men and women are equal? You were talking about Prabhupada, talking about inequality occurring naturally. But is there any way that they are equal?
Well, I just have to ask, does the questioner mean materially?
It means generally. Whatever you can say about it.
Okay. So let me just write this down because when I take breakfast, after this I go to breakfast, and then the devotees would always say, what did they ask? So let me write.
Jai.
All right. All right. Sure, of course. We're all human beings. And human beings, naturally, because only in the human form is the consciousness of the living entity developed, where we can ask who we are, where we are, why we are, what we are. And so it's the right, and it's actually the duty, according to the Vedanta Sutra, to ask these questions. So these questions naturally arise in any human being. So generally that's the most fundamental, basic way we're all equal. And especially when we come to Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada, I may have told in previous classes that it was Prabhupada's, when he saw that in the West, not like India, but in the West, how the boys and girls were always mixing freely from the time they're little kids and educated the same way. So Prabhupada saw that, and he saw it would have been artificial, especially in the West, to separate them completely. So Prabhupada saw that it would be better if he let the men and women serve together in his temples. And then Prabhupada went so far as to say, and it's because I have made this adjustment to the usual separation of men and women in Vedic culture. Because I made this adjustment, I have become successful. And yeah, so of course with etiquette, we don't, it's not a big party. There's etiquette between men and women, but together we can really make a difference in the world. Okay.
And what do you personally like about Ratha-yatra festivals?
Well, as we saw, maybe you saw online, Jagannath Puri, they went ahead, they had it this year. It was a big controversy, right? Because Modi didn't want to have it because of the COVID pandemic. And then the Puri Pandits said, no, we must have it. And there's something in our scripture which says, if we don't honor this, then we won't be able to have it again for another 12 years. So they made a compromise. They had it, but they had to observe some precautions so that it wouldn't make the pandemic worse. So what do I like? Oh, and by the way, in that connection, even in America, we're not having our physical three-dimensional live Ratha-yatras this year. But we're certainly remembering Lord Jagannath. So because it's the biggest public Hare Krishna festival of the year, it's always so great when we go to these Ratha-yatras. And I did go to Chicago and Philadelphia. And yeah, those are the only places. I never saw Prabhupada in San Francisco, which was the best. And in LA, Los Angeles, they always had great Ratha-yatras. But it's so great just to see the public pulling the ropes and singing Hare Krishna, because we always have these Ratha-yatras where there's already people there at the beach or down the main street. So there's already a built-in audience crowd, and it's so festive. They don't even have to believe in God, or if they do believe in God, they don't have to believe in Krishna. They just see that here's a bunch of spiritual people having a real good time. It's like a spiritual party. So everybody gets in the spirit of it. And it's just a great place where so many seeds of devotion are planted. Bhakti Lata Bij. And very often it's so powerful. It's such a powerful experience that people who are ready for Krishna consciousness, and then they experience Krishna consciousness in Ratha-yatra context, they often visit the temple, either right then or shortly afterwards. And many devotees tell how they became devotees from going to Ratha-yatra. So it's really inspiring like that, to see so many people appreciating Krishna consciousness as it is, because we hear that in the spiritual world, every step is a dance, all speech is song. And so that's what's going on at Ratha-yatra. It's a real glimpse of the spiritual world. That's my favorite. Oh, and also, one more thing. I don't know how it is in Russia, but in America, very often you go to Ratha-yatras and you end up meeting devotees you haven't seen in a long time. So it's a great reunion for many of us when we go to these Ratha-yatras, because we tend to go to them in different cities, not just where we are. So that's always fun, catching up with old friends.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true.
Mm-hmm. Any more?
Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
Has Prabhupada ever mentioned his favorite deities?
Mentioned his what?
Favorite deities, you know?
Mm-hmm. I may have told this one too, but yeah, he did actually. And I'll tell you a funny story in that connection. Well, first of all, after Prabhupada installed Sri Radha Ishwara, and that was the first big Radha Krishna deities Prabhupada ever installed. And the way those deities came was pretty miraculous. The devotees finally had Prabhupada in London, those pioneers who went to London, inspired by Prabhupada, encouraged by Prabhupada, Jamuna and Gurudas, and Shamsundar and Malati, and Mukunda and Janaki. So they were there for a whole year away from Prabhupada. Before then, they had been used to seeing Prabhupada a lot in America, especially in San Francisco. So in '68, they went to London, and that's a whole story, a whole odyssey of how they got in and then befriended the Beatles. And so Prabhupada's intention was to install a full-blown Radha Krishna temple right in the heart of London. So with George Harrison's help, they got 7 Bury Place. And then Prabhupada, they started advertising for the opening of the temple. And Shamsundar Prabhu was rushing to finish building it with very little help. But the amazing thing was that all the whole time they were rushing to finish the temple, there were no deities. I mean, they did have Jagannath deities, because Shamsundar, after he carved the first Jagannath deities in San Francisco, then he carved a few more sets, and he brought one set to London. But Prabhupada wanted to install Radha and Krishna in London. And they were making all these plans, but there was no deities. But Prabhupada was fully confident that Krishna would appear. So it was like maybe only a week. The grand opening was December 14th, 1969. So it was only a week or two before then that I think what finally happened was Mukunda put an ad in the paper, want ad, wanted Radha Krishna deities, because the devotees knew there was a sizable Indian community already in London at that time. Not as big as today, but already. So a Mr. Goyal called up the temple and said that he had some deities, if the devotees would like to take a look, because this Indian community that Mr. Goyal was part of, were also opening a temple, and they had also ordered deities from India. But en route from India, there was a little chip in one of the pinkies. Pinky means the littlest finger of Radharani's hand. So they thought that the deity was spoiled. So anyway, so Prabhupada went to Mr. Goyal's house with Tamal Krishna, and Mukunda, and Shamsundar, and Gurudas, and Jamuna to look at the deities. And so the man, Mr. Goyal, he was very, he was from India, so he knew the etiquette of hosting a holy person. So he let Prabhupada, he was thrilled actually to have Prabhupada there. So Prabhupada, like an expert negotiator, and Prabhupada, of course, was in sales for many years. So Prabhupada knew the way to get the deities from this man, because the man, they weren't sure that there was some hesitation on his part to donate them. Maybe he wanted to sell them. Maybe he didn't want to even to part with them. But Prabhupada knew and that he wanted them. So they were, so the man brought the deities out, and they were covered with cloth. And the man was just very eager to just uncover the deities and start negotiating with Prabhupada. But Prabhupada knew how to do it. He just wanted to talk about everything under the sun with the man, his family, where he was from in India, and not even talk about the deities, right? Until it was time for Prabhupada to go. And then at the last minute, as a negotiating tactic, he let the man unveil the deities. And then Prabhupada said, oh yes, that's very nice. Okay, Tamal Krishna, would you try picking up Radharani and Shamsundar Krishna, and you can carry them? Oh yes, Prabhupada. Yes. Okay, then you can take them out. And so the Indian man was flabbergasted, Mr. Gayo. Oh, Swamiji, he wanted to negotiate. And Prabhupada he just took charge, and he said, no, don't worry, we'll take great care of them, and there's no worry about anything, the chip finger, no worry. And so the man, who by then had been in Prabhupada's presence for some time and saw how pure and potent and amazing Prabhupada was, so he couldn't contradict Prabhupada. He wasn't going to try to stop Prabhupada. So they took the deities out into the vehicle that they had, and then Prabhupada, just got up and thanked the man, offered humble pranams, and the man is, but Swamiji, and the Prabhupada said, don't worry, And so Prabhupada got in the car, and he said to the devotees, okay, drive away fast. So they drove away, and then not even a block or two, once Prabhupada saw that they were okay, that they were in the clear, that they had the deities, and the man was not following them, then Prabhupada said, okay, now pull over. And so they pulled over, Shamsundar pulled over, Prabhupada got out, and then actually the deities were not even unveiled yet. That's right. The deities still had their veil on. And so then, only then, in the car, were the deities unveiled, and they were exquisite. They were so beautiful. And Prabhupada was like, Krishna, I knew Krishna would come. They are perfect. So, and then the whole lila of Prabhupada installing them in the temple on December 14th, and because it was a rush job, the canopy, the Jagannath deities, it was almost a disaster of the deities crashing down, and Prabhupada heroically holding up the whole platform. Anyway, Prabhupada told us later, he said, Krishna, he comes all over the world in his deity form. I'm just paraphrasing now, but here's the gist of it. But in this instance, Krishna has personally come. So Prabhupada was making it very clear that Sri Sri Radha and Ishwar were the special manifestation of Krishna, the most special of any of the deities. Now, one of the brahmacharis who was pioneering in those days, his name was Kula Shekar. He's since passed away. Kalan Juri was his British name, Kalan Juri, and he became Kula Shekar. And he was there in Bury Place. And then later on in the mid-70s, he moved to New Vrindavan, where the presiding deities are Sri Sri Radha Vrindavan Chandra. And they're also very beautiful deities. And they also have amazing pastimes. And in fact, maybe I have to tell you this pastime sometime. But they were vandalized. But that's another story. I'll tell you that later sometime. But Prabhupada really had an intimate relationship with Sri Radha Vrindavan Chandra. And they're also amazing, very beautiful deities. So in the mid-70s, I think it was 1976, yes, the last time Prabhupada visited New Vrindavan, Kulashekar had moved there. And he was showing Prabhupada around New Vrindavan because the devotees knew that he had been with Prabhupada in London, and they let Kulashekar give Prabhupada a tour of New Vrindavan, the latest developments in New Vrindavan. And so Kulashekar, he was really talking up the deities, Radha Vrindavan Chandra, and how they're the most beautiful deities in the world. Don't you think, Prabhupada? And Prabhupada would not commit to that. He would not say that of all the deities in the world that he had installed, that Radha Vrindavan Chandra were the most beautiful. Yeah, so that was another hint. Finally, we have, oh yeah, I forgot this. Son Prabhupada, he said something about Radhalandanishwar to Kulashekar, who had been there, who was a London boy. And so Kulashekar surrendered. Oh yes, Prabhupada. There really are no deities like Radhalandanishwar. So, I forgot the question now. What was the question?
The question was, has Prabhupada ever mentioned what deities were his favorite?
Yeah. Well, that's what he told us. And of course, he had his childhood deities that he carried, and then he let us worship them. I believe they're still in his rooms in Mayapur. But in terms of his preaching mission, that whole pastime, because you know, when Prabhupada established that London Ratha-yatra, that London Yatra with Radhalandanishwar, that's when the world preaching really took off. That's when it truly became the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Pretty much it was just in America and a little bit in Europe. But after London was established, London being, you know, practically the crossroads of the world, yeah, it really took off like anything. And then Prabhupada's global tours got very intense. Yeah. So, nice questions. Any more?
We have one more. I'm not so sure, but I will ask it.
Okay.
At the beginning of ISKCON, had life members, you mentioned that. How would a person become a life member at the beginning?
Okay. Well, life membership, that was a program Prabhupada introduced in India, actually. When the devotees, when Prabhupada brought his first Western disciples to India in 1970 in the fall, they were a big sensation, a big hit, because a big novelty, because no one had ever seen Western Vaishnavas. But then the press especially became a little suspicious. Are these really Vaishnavas? Maybe the CIA has paid off the Swami to bring American spies into India, because after all, the Cold War was going on between Russia and the West. Or maybe they're just psychedelic hippies just on another trip. So when Prabhupada saw that mood turn from appreciation to suspicion, then Prabhupada did something very revolutionary. He stopped the Yuga Dharma in India. He stopped our Sankirtan. And he said, okay, now we're going to start life membership. In other words, we're going to enlist the support. We're going to recruit big people in India, because you can do that in India because of the culture. So Prabhupada took his first Western disciples in India, around to big, big people in government and business. And Prabhupada inspired them that actually what really India has to offer the world is spiritual revolution, Sanatana Dharma. And you can help us. This would be a great credit to you. You're so highly placed in society by your birth, but who knows what's going to happen in your next life, right? Unless you use that good birth properly. So a lot of big people in Calcutta, Bombay, Delhi, they really became our allies in establishing the first big temples in India. So that's how it started in India, life membership. Now in the West, it was a totally different context. It was alien soil, so to speak, culturally. Most of the people thought we were strange. So I'll tell you how the first life members, oh, and by the way, the criterion or the requirement in India to become a life member was, and it was nothing really for these big people, but if you paid, if you donated, if you signed up and paid the fee, it was 1,111 rupees, which of course is worth a lot more then. Then that entitled you to receive a lifetime subscription to Back to Godhead magazine. And you could stay at any one of our temples in the world if you traveled. And you were entitled to receive all the books as they would come out. And so that was a lot. That was a lot of giving back to the people, the life members. But it was very smart. It was very wise for Prabhupada to do that. Now in the West, because the culture was not favorable, it was much more materialistic in those days in the West. And people thought we were strange, and they thought we were part of a cult. So the first kind of, and all the devotees, they lived inside the temples. It was temple-based. It wasn't congregation-based the way it is today. So the only way to be a devotee was to join the movement and join a temple. So the first kind of seeds of a congregation came when a lot of parents of devotees were alarmed that their children were joining the Hare Krishna movement because they thought their children were joining a cult. But some of the parents were not alarmed. In fact, they appreciated very much that their children were joining a spiritual path. They were getting on a spiritual path, and the path is very clean. They were no longer taking drugs or having promiscuous sex, or it was a very healthy lifestyle. So some of these parents, they saw that a lot of the parents did not appreciate. And so they became like, they started a group. It was called Friends of Lord Krishna. In English, it's F-O-L-K, folk, which means friends, folks, friendly people, Friends of Lord Krishna. And they began to hold programs in their homes, and they'd invite concerned parents to their homes, and they would become friends of the movement by getting rid of the fears of the parents of people who were joining the Hare Krishna movement. And then later on, life membership did come a little later, once that became built up a little bit, but that became after Prabhupada left, really, life members. So to this day, yeah, actually the whole life membership thing, it still exists, but it's sort of been replaced by the whole congregational ministry, Jayapataka Maharaj and Konteya Prabhu. And they put out a lot of materials showing devotees how to have what they call namahata centers and Bhakti Viksha programs. So that's what goes on today. Because it's the whole demographic, the whole population has changed in ISKCON from being temple-based to congregation-based. So devotees are doing these programs, these Namhat and Bhakti Viksha programs in the congregation. And many are Indians, even in the West. So, yeah. Here in Tucson, I don't know how it is in Moscow or wherever you happen to be on this podcast, but here in Tucson, we don't have so many Indian people, but we do have a congregation. It's kind of small because Tucson, Arizona is like a cowboy and Indian town where they made all the cowboy movies. And so it's pretty uncultured. They still have rodeos, which means they ride the horses and they ride the bulls. Yeah, it's pretty barbaric. Anyway, yeah, life membership has more or less been taken over by the congregational ministry. All right. So, how are we doing, Sati Prabhu?
I think you're doing very good.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
All right. That's all the questions?
We actually have one more.
Okay.
If devotees would fall and then come back to ISKCON, would Prabhupada allow them to serve deities immediately on the altar again?
If devotees would fall away from Krishna consciousness, then come back, would Prabhupada let them right away
Not right away. It's not said right away. It says they're allowed to serve directly the deities.
Oh, serve the deities. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think historically. I know Prabhupada, yeah, in general, of course, Prabhupada would just be so happy when people would come back. He loved to hear stories of how people would come to Krishna consciousness, and he would love it to hear how they came back, because Prabhupada was like the father, the grandfather. He was always trying to increase the family of devotees because he knew how much that pleased Krishna. So what comes to mind is the Apichet verse in the 9th chapter of the Gita, where Krishna says to Arjuna, even if one commits the most abominable action, sudaracharo, if one is engaged in devotional service, he's to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. So without reading the whole purport, I encourage you to look at, I think it's 930, and see how Krishna considers someone saintly, even if he commits the most abominable actions. And how is that? Because one might say, well, how is somebody saintly if he's committed the most abominable actions? Well, the answer is in the last line, samyak vivasito hisa, because he's properly situated in his determination. Prabhupada talks in the purport about how circumstantially, because of past habit, we may temporarily succumb. We may give in to the temptations of the illusory energy, circumstantially. But if our determination is mainly to be a devotee, then the fire of the remorse we feel, the lamentation we feel when we do fall, burns off that desire to sin again. And we're rightly situated in our determination. And Krishna says to Arjuna, that's a saintly person, not someone who has never fallen or is someone who, despite having fallen, is determined. And then Krishna says to Arjuna, now you go out and you tell the world this, because if I say it, they might not believe me, because sometimes I break my promise to protect and save my devotee. but you tell it because people know that you're a very moral person, and they'll believe you because of your character. My character, they're not sure of. Of course, Krishna's character is perfect, but Krishna's priority is not ordinary morality, but protecting the devotee. So we have so many examples in Krishna Lila of Krishna breaking his promise to save his devotee. So going back, yeah, there's no reason why once a person is reinstated, and that has to be seen, right? Just like when we come to Krishna, there's first initiation, which is like a chance to prove ourselves. And then once we've proven that those vows we take at initiation, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no meat eating, no gambling, that we can actually keep those vows, then second initiation, which is a chance to worship the deity and a chance to share Shastra. Prabhupada would not give second initiation unless the person was serious about studying his books and about increasing his service to the deity. So that's what we do. For example, in Tucson, like it's coming up now. Second initiation idea is coming up for some first initiates. So then our temple president says, okay, well, if you're willing to help out with the deity worship and you're willing to give class sometime, then I'll take that as a sign you're ready for second initiation. So if somebody comes back after falling away, then it has to be seen if that coming back is real or if it's just a temporary convenience. Sometimes people come back to temples. Sometimes people join temples or come back to temples or come back to devotee because they have no other place to go. They're homeless. So, okay, that's at least you're coming to Krishna. But that motive has to be purified. We have to grow in our Krishna consciousness more than just being suffering or being financially destitute. We actually have to become serious and sincere. Outgrow the lower motives and progress. Yeah. Yeah, so I personally don't see why not. I don't think Prabhupada would bar or prevent anybody from worshiping the deity again. But there has to be some evidence that the person is fit to worship the deities. Okay, I guess it's getting late. So thank you very much, Prabhu. It's always wonderful to zoom over to Russia from little Tucson. Hare Krishna.